Hi friends, and welcome back to Pastor Paul's Midweek Bible Festival. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Well, we have arrived at the first week after the season of Easter, the first week after Pentecost, and our passage this week is from the Old Testament prophet, Isaiah, chapter 6, verses 1 through 8. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne high and lofty, and the hem of his robe filled the temple. Seraphs were in attendance above him. Each had 6 wings. With 2 they covered their faces, and with 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they flew. And one called to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. The pivots on the thresholds shook at the voices of those who called, and the house filled with smoke. And I said, Woe is me, I am lost, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips, yet my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Then one of the seraphs flew to me, holding a live coal that had been taken from the altar with a pair of tongs. The seraph touched my mouth with it and said, Now that this has touched your lips, your guilt has departed and your sin is blotted out. Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send, and who will go for us? And I said, Here am I, send me. The word of God for the people of God. Now this Sunday, like I said, is the first Sunday after Pentecost. This weekend, first Sunday after Pentecost, and this coming Sunday is commonly known as Trinity Sunday. This is not a fact well known by most Baptists, but Methodists and everybody else know it, so we might as well go ahead and join the rest of Christendom and call it Trinity Sunday. On this day, our thoughts turn to the Trinity, the Father, Son, and Spirit. The 3 in 1, the mystery at the heart of our faith. That word mystery is important for us today. The mystery at the heart of our faith is the Trinity, Father, Son, and Spirit. Now, how much thought do we give the Trinity day to day, I wonder? Maybe a lot, maybe not. I don't know. But it is a mystery, is it not? The Father is God. The Son is God. The Spirit is God. They are all God. But the Father is not the Son. The Son is not the Spirit. The Spirit is not the Father. And so on. I think mathematically, and because I had to take some math back in college, and for me, the concept of the Trinity basically violates what we like to call the transitive property. If A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C. Kind of violates that property. That's the essence of the so-called logical problem of the Trinity. But of course, and this is kind of the part of the clip and save, the Trinity is not simply a concept. It is not a concept first. The concept of the Trinity is wholly secondary to the reality of the Trinity itself. And reality, friends, make no mistake, always has a way of eluding our best efforts to grasp it. Says the scientist. Sounds weird that a scientist would say that. Reality has a way of eluding our best efforts to grasp it. So, science, for example, works so well because it's mostly about fairly simple, isolated features of the world and focuses on the physical, the repeatable, the demonstrable. But I got a little secret for you. Even electrons transcend our figures and our mental images. We can't picture an electron. Mathematics does a decent job of communicating the reality we call an electron, but again, math is not the reality. Math is a manner of speaking about the electron. The reality itself, can't picture it. The point I'm trying to make is that the world in itself, reality, has a way of overflowing our categories and exceeding our expectations and violating our predictions. In order to communicate about the world, we rely on ideas, concepts, communicable pieces of information like the words I'm using right now that we use to communicate, to transfer ideas, but those ideas, those concepts, always fall short of the object itself. Whether it's an electron or whether it's God. The German poet and polymath Johann Wolfgang von Goethe put it this way. Nice quote here. Check this out. All theory, dear friend, is gray, but the golden tree of life springs evergreen. All theory, that is all thought, all ideas, dear friend, are gray, but the golden tree of life springs evergreen. Our words, concepts, and ideas are always transcended by the reality to which they point. And God, the Trinity, is perhaps the prime example of this perennial shortfall. The Trinity is a mystery. We can't always think of it clearly, but we know it when we see it. We know the Spirit when we see it. The idea of mysteries had a rough time of it over the last few hundred years, especially in technological, scientifically advanced societies such as our own. Science and its myriad highly successful applications have convinced us, in a sense, that mysteries are for solving. Maybe Agatha Christie has something to do with this too. Mysteries are for solving. One of the great things I've learned about science is that more often than not, if you think about something hard enough, from enough angles, talk to enough people about it, within enough context, if you work on it, you can solve it. You can understand it. You can learn it. You can overcome it. I remember certain concepts I first encountered in graduate school that completely flummoxed me. I remember sitting at my metal desk in that downstairs office in the Duke Physics building, having no clue how to add angular momentum. It was the weirdest thing I'd ever seen in my life. But a year later, that same idea was as natural to me as walking. I had figured it out and used it for a year, and I wondered how I could ever have been so lost in the mystery of it. To learn something is to master it, to overcome it, to solve it. And this same idea permeates much of our thinking. Mysteries are for solving. Well, physics and other scientific mysteries, I believe, are for solving. But the Trinity, and even just the idea of God, is not. God is not a concept or a model or a category. God transcends our categories and lies far beyond our conceptual grasp. God is a mystery, but this mystery is not for solving. The God mystery, hear me now, it's important, we'll come back to it, is for number one, experiencing, and for number two, deepening. The God mystery is for experiencing and for deepening, not for solving. Some mysteries are better when you deepen them. That's what they're for, to dig into, not to solve and put on a shelf. The God mystery is for experiencing and for deepening. And when we encounter God, all of our ideas fall woefully short of the reality. Just ask Isaiah. Now, Isaiah knew nothing, he knew something about God, but he knew nothing of the Trinity. The Trinity was an idea that developed, it was 1,000 years after Isaiah lived, but the idea of the Trinity was created, was in a sense recognized, discovered, if you will. Isaiah lived, but we'll come back to the Trinity. Right now the idea is the mystery of God, and then we'll put the Trinity back on that in a minute. Isaiah lived in Israel in the 8th century BC. At the same time, turns out, the Assyrian Empire was expanding westward toward Israel. Isaiah looked to the slowly encroaching Assyrians, and then he turned and looked to the godlessness of his own people, and he knew in his heart that the end was coming. The waywardness of Israel and Judah guaranteed their fall, and Isaiah knew it. He carried this knowledge in his heart. It weighed him down. He didn't know what to do with it. But one day, in approximately 740 BC, the year that King Uzziah died, he carried this knowledge of the encroaching end of Israel, the coming end of Israel, the fall of both the southern and northern kingdoms. He carried them in his heart to the temple. Presumably this is the temple. On that day, Isaiah had an intimate encounter with the God who transcends all thoughts. I saw the Lord sitting on a throne, high and lofty, and the hem of his robe filled the temple. Seraphs, those are angels, flying angels, were in attendance above him. Each had 6 wings. With 2 they covered their faces, with 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they flew. And one called to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. And the pivots on the thresholds shook as the voices called, and the house filled with smoke. Wow, it's quite a vision. It's what we call a mystical vision. He had a mystical experience. He had an encounter with God. God was present. God showed up. And Isaiah was ready. The house filled with smoke. We have seen smoke and cloud and vapor before when it comes to God. Smoke, cloud, vapor. When Moses reached the top of Mount Sinai, he entered a cloud. When Jesus led his 3 closest disciples to the top of the mountain and was transfigured before them, they were overcome by a cloud. A voice spoke from a cloud. The voice of God spoke from a cloud. And here again we see a cloud, smoke, filling the temple, obscuring vision, making it impossible to see. The cloud, or smoke, or vapor represents the failure of our faculties to know God, whether it's Moses on Sinai, whether it's Peter, James, and John at the top of the mountain, whether it's Isaiah in the temple. When God shows up, our faculties fail. We can't see. That's a metaphor for not being able to understand. In each of these 3 stories, God is intimately, frightfully present. In each of them, someone is overcome by God's presence. It is more than they could have ever imagined. The presence of God shuts down their ability to see, that is, to know and understand, and they can operate only in trust in such a situation. When you can't see, when you can't put your thoughts together, you can operate only on trust. There's only submission and trust when one's ability to control the situation by understanding it, by seeing it, is lost. Isaiah is overcome by God. His incapacity to see and conceptualize Yahweh is the theme here. And what's his response? Humility, truth-telling. He speaks in humility and in truth. For what else but the truth can be said in such a predicament? Woe is me, Isaiah cries, I am lost, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips. Yet my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. To encounter God is the exact same thing as knowing your station, your small size, and your incompleteness. To know God is to know yourself. And Isaiah sees himself at the exact moment that he sees God. I am lost, a man of unclean lips. Then Isaiah heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send, and who will go for us? And Isaiah knew what he was talking about. Here I am, Isaiah said, send me. Thus was Isaiah called to speak a hard word to the people he loved. A hard word. The wayward people of Israel, to tell them to repent, or they would be crushed by the approaching Assyrians, which of course they eventually were, although it was not the last chapter in the story of Israel and Judah. But God chose Isaiah to carry the word, and apparently Isaiah obeyed with good commitment, clean follow-through. But today's lesson is about God, and not so much about Isaiah. To meet God is to come face to face with a presence wholly unlike ourselves, wholly transcendent, wholly uncontainable. That's what Isaiah learned. So what about the Trinity? Remember I said that the mystery of God was for experiencing and for deepening. Isaiah experienced that mystery of God. The Trinity is an idea that was developed 1,000 years later that deepens the mystery of God. It doesn't substitute for it. It doesn't summarize it. It doesn't diagram it or explain it. It deepens the mystery of God. The Trinity takes the transcendent mystery of God as encountered by Isaiah and adds new layers of depth to God. It deepens the mystery, as I have suggested. God is not simply otherworldly. God is also flesh and bone, like you and me. God is not simply one, a single thing, a single remote, isolated presence, but three. God is not a standalone entity, but is essentially, irreducibly relational. That's what the Trinity tells us. God is intrinsically, essentially relational. It's about the relations between us, between the aspects of God. God is not remote, but is intimately present not only in flesh and bone, but in the Spirit. These three, Father, Son, and Spirit, draw all people and all creatures into the deep, deep mystery of God, leaving no one out, and invites us to take part in that dance, in that communion, in that divinity. That is the invitation. May the Father, the Son, and the Spirit be with you today and in the days to come. Amen.